Welcome to Fencing Buddies podcast. I'm Alex, and with me is Sarah. Today we're diving into a fascinating article titled, Effects of Different Target Distances on the Kinematics of Hip, Knee, and Ankle Joints in the Fencing Lunge. It sounds pretty scientific, but I think it's going to have some real gold for fencers and coaches.
Thanks, Alex. This article caught my attention immediately because it moves beyond the typical fixed-distance lunge studies. As any fencer knows, in an actual bout, your opponent is rarely standing still. They're stepping back, stepping forward, and you have to adapt your lunge on the fly. This research tackles that dynamic aspect directly.
Exactly. That's what I love about it. So, they looked at 3 different target distances: short, normal, and long. What was the core question they were trying to answer here, and how did they go about it?
They essentially wanted to see how the angles and movements of a fencer's hip, knee, and ankle joints in both the front and rear legs changed when lunging to these different distances. They used 15 experienced male foil fencers, tracking their movements with a 3D motion analysis system, while they performed lunges. The normal distance was 1.5 times their height, short was 50 centimeters closer, and long was 30 centimeters farther.
Okay, so, kinematics, in plain English, what does that actually mean for a fencer? Were they just measuring how far a leg goes, or something more nuanced?
Good question. Kinematics refers to the description of motion without considering the forces that cause it. So, they weren't measuring how much power was generated but rather how the joints moved, how much they flexed, extended, and their overall range of motion in the sagittal plane, which is essentially looking at the forward and backward bending. Think of it as mapping out the precise dance of the joints during the lunge.
Ah, the dance of the joints. I like that. So, what did they find when fencers had to hit a target farther away? Did they just stretch further?
It's more complex than just stretching. As the target distance increased, they found significant changes, particularly in the rear leg during the propulsive phase. Fencers showed greater flexion of the rear knee joint early on, followed by greater extension of both the rear hip and knee joints, and increased plantar flexion of the rear ankle.
Propulsive phase, plantar flexion, wait. So, the rear leg, the one pushing off, it bends more deeply at the knee initially, then extends more forcefully through the hip and knee. And, plantar flexion means pointing the foot down, right? So really driving off the ball of the foot?
Precisely, Alex. You got it. It means the rear leg is essentially loading up more powerfully, and extending more fully to generate the necessary force and reach for that longer distance. They also observed a higher peak velocity of the body center of mass, which makes sense. You need to move faster and further to cover more ground quickly. I've seen that in my athletes. When they really commit, that rear leg just explodes.
That's interesting, and it lines up with what I try to teach my youth fencers about pushing through the floor with their back leg. It's not just about stepping, it's about pushing. Now, what about the front leg, the one that lands and stops the movement? That's where a lot of stress can happen.
Absolutely. The front leg's role is crucial in the braking phase and absorbing impact. The study found that as target distance increased, there was significantly greater flexion of the front hip and knee joints. They're essentially acting as shock absorbers and length adjusters.
So the front hip and knee are bending more deeply to control that longer lunge and make the touch. That's a huge insight, especially for injury prevention. I've heard that fencers have a high incidence of hip and knee joint injuries in the front leg.
Exactly. This research provides data to support that. The hip and knee joints of the front leg are doing a lot of work to compensate and adjust to the target distance. The ankle, however, didn't show as much variation. The researchers suggested this might be because the ankle joint was already reaching its dorsiflexion limit, its maximum bend upwards, regardless of distance.
That's fascinating. So, the body primarily uses the hip and knee to make those fine-tune adjustments for distance, particularly in the front leg. This means targeted training for specific ranges of motion in those joints could be vital for adaptability and avoiding injury.
Definitely. For coaches, this means understanding how changes in target distance affect specific joint mechanics can provide new indicators for technical instruction. And for trainers, it's invaluable for developing more specific lower extremity training and injury prevention programs, focusing on building strength and control in the hip and knee, especially for longer lunges.
So, the key takeaway for fencers is that every lunge isn't the same. Your body, especially your lower limbs, adapts very specifically to the distance, with the rear leg generating power and the front leg absorbing and adjusting. Understanding this can help you train smarter and lunge more effectively and safely.
Absolutely. Training for adaptability to different distances, not just one perfect lunge, is crucial for real-world competition.
Thanks everyone for listening to Fencing Buddies podcast. Until next time, keep your distance and stay sharp.